everybody. I'm Karen Panetta, and I am the IEEE Awards Board Chair. And today we are here to celebrate the 2022 IEEE Edison Medal recipient, sponsored by Samsung Electronics, for Dr. Alan Bovik. Dr. Bovik, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Karen.
We're so excited because you not only bring to us the Edison is one of our oldest medals, but you bring such worldwide impact that is tangible for everybody to understand the impact on humanity that some types of work have done. So a lot of the things that we do, we really have difficulty communicating to folks what we actually do and how it impacts our everyday lives. But one of the things our audience needs to know is that Dr. Bovik's, I've heard some statistic that 70% of every broadcast bit that goes out there is somehow being used using your technology for quality. So that to me means you're really everywhere we are with communications and broadcast and video. So I want to start off by essentially asking you, where did you even come up with the idea of a quality metric for video?
Oh, well, sure. Mostly there wasn't one. So we had some other projects that we were working on where we were, processing images and changing how they look. And we wanted to know whether they were better. And just like you said, the only way people at the time did it was just to, point their eyeballs at them and try to decide which one is better. But you can only do that with a few pictures. So we tried to create some quality algorithms, and eventually we happened upon one that became very successful, called structural similarity. But we didn't really think that people are going to use it widely. It was basically a project between myself and my student Joe Wong, just to for the other project we were working on. But then, over the next couple of years, we discovered that the television industry had taken an interest. They noticed the little paper we wrote, and they had a committee that was trying to look at such things. And before you know it, there's companies who are knocking at our door and wanting to use our ideas. And by 2010 or 2012, all kinds of companies were working on this. Well, naturally, this made us very interested. And so we dedicated quite a bit more of our efforts to research in this direction, meaning the science behind it, trying to create new theories of how people perceive the quality of pictures and videos, as well as conducting very large human studies on, actually asking people, ultimately tens of thousands of people who have given millions of judgments of picture and video quality over the years for us. And new algorithms that have even gone beyond structural similarity. And as you say, they now control, it's actually closer to 80% of the bits that are traveling over the internet today. So we're very gratified by that. I just want to emphasize that, I consider myself mostly an educator who's been working on problems with my students that I find to be extremely interesting at the nexus between video and visual neuroscience. And, we're naturally extremely happy that the outcomes of that have become very popular. But mostly I aspire to, I think it's three things. One is, perspiration, a lot of hard work. Two, passion. You have to be interested in what you're working on. And number three, brilliant, hardworking students who are just as excited as I am about these projects. And over the years, there've been so many that have been involved in every aspect of what we've done.
It's so interesting because you mentioned the collecting of subjective judgments from human evaluators. And I look back, and back then, I think that's you developed the first human cloud because you were having all these people do these subjective judgments. And you also did the heavy lifting for researchers like myself who then got into the field after you introduced this, because your analysis with all the psychovisual cortical, retinocorneal distortions and perception, we didn't have to look at that. You just gave us the answer so that we could then use it to elevate our own research. So, that is a huge contribution, not just for the impact it's made on the implementation, but for other young researchers and aspiring PhD students that wanted to expand into this area or even get into imaging. So that was really a great contribution. One of the things I have to ask you though is, it's highly unusual. You've got huge accolades for technical accomplishments, and we expect them from, IEEE, because you are a previous recipient of a technical field award, which was great. But you have an Emmy, not just one. And most people think about, okay, what television show was this engineer on? So can you talk a little bit?
Well, we do have a couple of Emmys, and I just want to emphasize again, I have a couple of Emmys, but 6 of my students also have Emmy awards sitting on somewhere in their house or on their shelf at work, and so it's all been a great collaboration with great students. Why is that? Well, remember that the Emmy granting institutions are the academies of television arts and sciences, and they've always given awards in the categories of engineering. In fact, the primetime Emmy award that I and a couple of my students received is in the for outstanding achievement in engineering development. So they've always been given, but they've usually been given to whole companies. So Apple receives it, or Dolby receives it. In fact, we were the first academics ever to be honored, and we were honored, individually, each with our own, Emmy statue. So that was great and a big surprise. Absolutely.
That's awesome, because a lot of times, people disconnect for folks from academia. They don't think what we do is translational into the real world. So I think that impact and that recognition is huge. So the next thing I want to do is I want to back up. I want to back up to before you were Dr. Bovik, when you were just in school. What first even got you into engineering, and what inspired you? Who was your role model? And then we'll progress into how you even got into this field.
Well, sure. That's kind of easy because, back when I was in high school and I finally had started to shape up and be a pretty good student, I used to read a lot of the old style science fiction back then. And the old style science fiction writers back then were Arthur Clarke, Isaac Asimov. Those two were my favorites. And they instilled in me an absolute sense of wonderment about the possibilities of science and technology. It was just amazing and incredibly eye-opening. And to this day I can still read stories by those guys, and today by great science fiction writers of every gender and every cross of life, like N.K. Jemisin, and still feel that sense of wonder. So I think that's where I first felt that. And did I know when I was in high school I wanted to be an engineer? And I didn't really know what engineering was. So I remember my dad telling me you should be an engineer, because I was doing very well in science and math at the time. And somehow I got into the public university in my state, which was the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And once I got revved up there and found the right discipline, I ran into a fellow named Professor Thomas Huang, who was the image processing, guru of that era. And he's of course won IEEE medal himself and so on. And he was just this low-key fellow who nevertheless was just filled with his subject, always excited about it, even though you could never tell unless you knew him. Brilliant teacher who'd walk in with a mug and then show these amazing image processing examples in the class. And my eyes opened up and I said, finally, I figured out what I want to do in life is, work in this field. So I hung around and got a PhD with him, and with also Professor Dave Munson, who was my second advisor and enthusiastic as well. And I wanted to teach, so I came to the University of Texas. And the last thing I'll say is that it was here that I started to meet visual neuroscience people, and to understand that working in cross discipline, stepping outside the box, could really energize your interests, your passion, and your research, because you're going places where people don't usually go, which is between disciplines. And it makes it more fun and exciting, and you keep learning all the time. So and it's harder, it really is. You have to, I've learned over the years. I'm a self-taught visual neuroscientist at this point, even though I'm a double E. So that's what I would say is, don't be afraid to step outside the box.
You said a couple of things that resonated strongly. One, your dad telling you to be an engineer. My dad also told me to be an engineer, but it was because I was costing him too much money. But the second thing you mentioned was, when you got your act together and, started being a better student. One of the things that I hear all the time from young students is, they feel that if they're not, top notch, straight A's, one failure, one B, one C, one D, this is not for me. And, I think that you mentioned persistence. I think that these are things that are good themes for our young people to hear, because it's not about, the steady state of performance, but more about the ambition and keep trying. And we don't even allow failure anymore, right? We want them to understand that failure is part of the game. But the other thing you mentioned was, just the interdisciplinary. Now, when you started doing this, interdisciplinary was like a play word in academia. It was like, yeah, we talk about it, but we really don't want to work with those engineers. So you bridge this gap by reaching in and learning another field. And today, the name of the game is taking down those boundaries and those walls, because everything we're doing has to be interdisciplinary. So especially with artificial intelligence, we joked that everybody has to do artificial intelligence today. You can't do that unless you're talking across these fields. So for young people who are out there and they're like, well, did you take courses in neuroscience? Did you, how did you, it's easy to reach across the wall and say, hey, let's talk. But how did you dive in and become comfortable with neuroscience?
Yeah. Well, you have to first of all understand and that there's other areas that might be impactful to what you're doing. So
Mhm.
you need to be unafraid in realizing that, well, other disciplines might help your current work. So the work I was first doing at university was very engineering. It was like removing noise from images. Okay, but um, as I started to meet people and look around at the university, rather than sort of staying in my own little tunnel, I tried to learn what other people were doing. And I found that, well, visual neuroscientists are a lot like engineers. They create models, they apply those models, they try to, use mathematics and statistics. And it's not so hard to learn something else. So I read papers and I found that they weren't hard to read. It wasn't, some esoteric, neurobiology that I had to transcend. It was, very engineering like. So, when you cross those boundaries, you often find that the path isn't so hard, but it seems like it before you do it. It seems like it before you do it. Just like, you mentioned earlier conducting these large human studies. That's something that nobody ever wanted to do because it's just so much work, and it is.
Yeah.
I mean, every one of these, some like 20 to 22 human studies that we've conducted, each one is a 6 month to a 1 year effort, just in preparing it, designing it, the protocol, making sure nothing's going to go wrong. You hope,
Mhm.
and then actually conducting the study, which takes months, because you may have, thousands of or hundreds of thousands of human opinion scores that you're going to collect, and then analyzing all the data. So I would say, don't be afraid to do that kind of thing, because even today, where there are large data sets,
Mhm.
it doesn't usually involve people coming to your laboratory, at least not in engineering.
Yep.
Sure, in psychology and so they do that kind of thing, but in engineering, people are hesitant to say, "I'm going to, have a human study where people have to come to my lab by the dozens and come in and sit down, and we have to take the time to have them participate in this study and express
Mhm.
what they're doing." And
Mhm.
most people won't do that still. So
Mhm. Yeah, that is absolutely true. And, a lot of engineering students too, when we're talking about even framing these studies, they might ask questions. It's okay when you're asking them very simple questions, but sometimes even phrasing the questions so that the participants understand what it
mm,
is you're asking them. Because if you don't ask the same question that's understood across different participants, you're like, oh, we asked that wrong. We got to go back and redo the study or redo the questions. And you find out like, wow, you know what? Communication also comes into it.
yes. Another thing is, a lot of people who are in engineering, especially in academia, they are like, well, I'm a theorist. Okay. And I'm a theorist and I always will be a theorist and
Mhm,
that sort of thing. But, if you really want to do something important, well, you might prove an important theorem,
mhm,
possibly. It's really hard to do that, although you should try.
mhm,
But if you want to make an impact, okay, you need to try your theories out. And to do that the right way, you need to become, to some degree, perhaps, an empiricist.
mhm,
Conduct your own experiments. It's okay to be a scientist as well
mhm,
as an engineering, mathematician or an
mhm,
applied mathematician. Being
mhm,
a scientist is worthwhile as well, and you put the two together, and you can really accomplish something. And then industry gets interested in what you're
mhm.
doing. Okay, if it pans out.
That's awesome. And one of the things, you mentioned again was impact. So at this time, I want to start asking you about your involvement in IEEE. Has IEEE in any way informed your career or helped you build any of these skill sets or introduced you to the folks you needed to bridge the gap?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have. Well, first of all, that's pretty much where we publish most of what we do is in IEEE, and most of what we learn. Naturally, we looked outside as well. And, IEEE doesn't publish in visual neuroscience, but you do now because we publish in that area quite a lot. But also, just the incredible scientific and engineering environment that's supplied by IEEE in form of all of its
Mhm,
incredibly high quality conferences and journals. Not only that, but the way it brings people together. So I have been, mentored by not only older faculty like my advisors, but also by, my peers, people
mhm,
like Professor Ed Delp at Purdue, and Professor Rama Chalapa, who, these are people who I have gotten to know and ask for advice about every aspect of
mhm,
what you do in this career.
mhm.
Uh, and it's all through IEEE that I encountered them. It
That's
makes it possible for all these kind of interactions to happen. And the biggest thing though is sending my I love sending students to conferences. Okay. I mean, I used to kid around and call it, the Al Bovik motivational system. I get to go to a conference in Hawaii. But no, it's such a great they come back and they even more than I do, they go and interact and they look at every poster and they come back just filled with new ideas. And so, IEEE is kind of the backbone of, everything we as engineers, do.
and it's interesting because you mentioned, a lot of students do go to these conferences and researchers like yourself, you've accredited your students so much for contributing to all this work, but they are the infusion and bring new perspectives to things and help us inform our future endeavors. So I think that, students don't recognize that they play such an important role in our future successes. So, that's something I want to thank you for bringing out because that really is important.
I would just say that, and I say this often, I have learned much more from my students than they have from me, really, over the years. There's so many incredible, brilliant minds that I've had the great fortune to encounter in our students, and there's so many of them. I don't want to leave anybody out and start mentioning them
Mhm,
because there's a long list that we've been very lucky. But I can tell you that they have, great positions in places like Samsung.
mhm.
Uh, Hamid Sheikh, who is one of the Emmy winners from our lab, is now a vice president at Samsung.
Wow. So
Uh,
yeah,
uh,
thank you, Samsung, for sponsoring the medal.
Yeah, and Anush Murthy, another one of our Emmy-winning students, he's the head of video encoding at Netflix.
Wow.
Kalpana, I should put doctor in front of all these, except we're all friends. Kalpana Seshadrinathan, she's a CTO at a startup company right now. So she won an Emmy award as well as part of our effort. So it's students. Students are what make my job a joy and
Mhm.
interesting and everything.
Well, now you tempted me because you talked about a startup. Tell me about the role of entrepreneurship in now as you talk with these students and the research is spanning all these different areas. What opportunities do you see future opportunities for huge growth in entrepreneurship?
Absolutely, if that's what a student wants to do. I like to when I talk about entrepreneurship, I like to remember a very famous person in my field named Paul, I think his first name was Paul Huff. He invented something called the Huff transform, which
Oh,
has been it's absolutely central in all computer vision and image processing, and he patented it. He patented the Huff transform, and he could have made huge amounts of money because it wasn't something you could design around or dispense with.
mhm.
But he never did. And he was asked once, don't you? Why didn't you do? And he said, my students are my products.
Oh, there
And
you
he
go.
meant it. He just didn't care. He had the perfect job, he felt, as being an educator, and even though he could be that inventive.
Mhm.
uh, so yeah. Oh,
Wow.
to go on, but nevertheless, video is everywhere. Pictures are everywhere. I
Mhm.
mean, I feel very lucky to be in a field that people used to yawn at quite a lot. Oh, you're doing neuroscience and images? Okay. Yeah. But now it's like everywhere and everybody's interested in it. And if you work in this space, there's opportunity for starting up all kinds of companies in the video space. And
Mhm.
a lot
And
of them are succeeding.
what do you think the role of AI is gonna play in the future?
Well, I'm old enough that I've seen 4 waves of AI now. Okay, I remember the original perceptron, and then it died away, and then we had vanilla neural networks, and boy, it was exciting in New York Times and television, all that. And then it stuck around, but it wasn't big. And then there was the next wave, support vector machines, and so on. It livened up computer vision quite a bit, but and then it started to level out and so on. And then deep learning came. Now, deep learning is, of course, a much bigger thing because the dramatic successes, the
Mhm.
way you can apply it to anything, it's here to stay, and it really has transformed and changed everything. I mean, even education. I had to take a semester off for each of I teach a class called digital image processing,
Mhm.
and I teach another one called digital video. That one's for grad students. I took a semester off from each of those classes to completely revise them, to bring them into the deep learning age. I mean, I had to do that because otherwise I'd be this old geezer, teaching stuff that's not relevant anymore.
Teaching history. I say if I don't do that, we're history teachers. We're not.
Yeah, well, history teachers then. Yeah, you can't just teach the old stuff because half of this stuff just got wiped away. You don't
Mhm.
care about it anymore. So that's a big, anybody who's been a professor and created a new course
Mhm.
knows that it's a gigantic effort. It really is. It's just hundreds and hundreds of hours of work to do that. But I
Mhm.
felt it was worthwhile because I wanted, we were already using deep learning and research. It's
Mhm.
easy to do. High school students do it.
Mhm.
Well, we stay abreast and we do use modern methods, but in the classroom, it's hard to bring it in. But it's challenging to just get rid of everything. It's also challenging to explain deep learning. Oh, you can say, oh, input it. Oh, look at the output. It's perfect. It just beats everything. But how do you explain why deep learning works? How do you explain how to think about it? How do you explain to students that, yeah, math still matters? I show a cartoon that shows, it shows 3 panels. And the first is a crowd and there's a professor in front. He says, how many students are interested in deep learning? Everybody raise their hand. And then the next panel says, how many students are interested in mathematics? Nobody raises their hand. And then the last one is, how many students are interested in data science? And they all raise their hand again. So, I try to encourage them. Yeah, right now it's easy to be a Python
Mhm.
programmer, do PyTorch, writing all these things and
Mhm.
plug and chug and get great results. But I'm already noticing, like the other 3 waves of AI, that this wave is cresting. It's going to
Mhm.
level off. We're going to hit performance limits, and the only way you're going to be more valuable is if you have a full toolkit. You're not just a Python expert, okay?
Mhm.
But you can also, think and do the
Mhm.
math because the math is coming back.
Math is the new black.
Yeah, it's coming back to the new black, and in understanding deep networks, in trying to improve them, and also combine deep networks with old ways,
Mhm.
features, and so on. It'll do better. You can do better. It's
Right.
not just bigger, bigger, bigger. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's really worthwhile.
I do find that, everybody that says they're going to have to use AI in some capacity just wants to throw it into the black box and have the output come out. And so even educating people on the ethical aspects or, well, does this data make sense? So I have this, I keep telling people, yeah, you can say you're data driven, but without context and without that human context, it's missing quite a bit. So, you know, and that's why your human studies is not going to go away, right? We're not going to be able to just say, well, we'll just, you know, collect data on the internet and see how it goes. Like, no, those human studies are going to become more relevant because we're missing so much of the perspectives right now, even in the data sets we have. You know, looking at it, it's like, it's not a binary, it's this or it's that. It's why is it this? Why did my detection algorithm miss this? And we're not experts in that. We can't answer those questions. So,
It's a great point because I feel that going forward, even as deep network performance starts to hit some kind of asymptotes, I'm not saying we're there yet. Data collection is going to become more and more important. I just was telling my class this the other day. My students, I have students, I've got a bunch of PhD students graduating this year, and they're going to places like Meta platforms. They're going to
mhm,
Netflix. They're
mhm,
going to Amazon. They're going to YouTube and they're going to Dolby Laboratories. And boy, do they want those students because every one of those students has gathered experience in data gathering,
mhm,
human studies. Okay. And that's really what they're after. Otherwise, well, okay, they're smart and they can program, but these guys are scientists. So
mhm,
don't forget that, in whatever field you're in that uses deep learning, if you're the guy or gal that knows how to, gather data in a scientific way, you might be, extra valuable.
right. To set this up, everybody comes out with the technical skills. What is it that's going to make them special and unique and valuable in this time? That's
Yeah.
absolutely a good point. So while we're talking about students, let's ask the question: what advice would you have to a young student starting out? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I guess we'll limit that to engineering students because, as opposed to high school students and so on, right?
Okay,
So
okay.
I'll assume it's an engineering student broadly. It doesn't even have to be a double E. Okay. So, I see so many students wondering, where am I going to get the best job? Okay. Where am I going to make the most money? Where am I going to be most successful and rise, most quickly and those kind of things. Not all students are that way. What I like to see in students, because it's healthy for them and probably will lead to greater success, is what am I interested in? What really fascinates me? And maybe it's okay when you're starting out not to know,
Mhm,
but that's what you should be looking for as you pass through your coursework. School to me is just learning how to learn, number one, but
mhm,
also, and importantly, figuring out what it is that really fascinates you. Okay.
mhm,
Because what you decide is going to be the rest of your life. Okay, another 40 years. And if you pick something out because, mom or dad said you should do this or that, or because you thought, boy, it's hot right now,
mhm, mhm.
you're not, that's all going to pass.
It might not have to be 40 years if they decide they love something and become an entrepreneur. They might be able to retire in 10.
Could be, but I could tell you, if you love your work, you won't want to
They won't
retire.
want to retire.
I mean, I'm happy and successful enough. I'll never retire. Not my mentor, but my hero is
Mhm,
a fellow we have here at UT Austin. Um, his name is John Goodenough. Okay,
mhm,
I'll tell you a little about him. First of all, I've been at UT Austin for 38 years. Okay, when another 38 years passes, I will be his current age. Okay. He's 100 years old now, and he is very active in research. And that's my model.
mhm,
Okay. And
mhm,
he's a person who does both theory, but also crosses boundaries, steps outside the box, and does all kinds of empirical work.
mhm.
He's done very well. He invented the lithium ion battery, and at the age of 97, won the Nobel Prize in chemistry.
Wow,
Okay. And
wow.
his office is just close to mine, and he's happy and relaxed because he loves what he's doing. He's always happy and relaxed, always has been. He laughs really loudly and fills the halls with joy, and everybody loves him because he loves his work. And that's what you should aspire to, not how rich I can get or how quick I can retire, because that's not happiness.
Mhm.
Happiness is loving what you do every single day.
And that is great words to close with. So, Dr. Bovik, on behalf of the IEEE Awards Board and all of us at IEEE, congratulations on this wonderful accomplishment of the IEEE Edison Medal. We look forward to seeing you in San Diego to celebrate this with you in person. So anybody who wants to go to our Vixen Honor Ceremony will be May 6th in San Diego. And again, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Samsung, for sponsoring this medal and to continue to support the IEEE Awards program. So to all of you and Dr. Bovik, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's been my great pleasure. And well, thank you, IEEE. And the